camera. I wanted to say, Captain, we're under attack. Sorry.
You're listening to Coding Blocks, episode 86. Subscribe to us and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app.
And you can go to codingblocks.net where you can find show notes, examples, discussion, and a whole bunch of other things.
Send your feedback, questions, and rants to comments at codingblocks.net. Follow us on Twitter at codingblocks, or head to www.codingblocks.net and find all our social links there at the top of the page. With that, I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm Jacek.
And I'm Michael Outlaw.
All right, and tonight we're taking a break from the computer science topics we've been talking about to talk about a few more practical items. So we each brought a couple topics to the show tonight and kind of surprised each other a little bit. And so we hope you enjoy. And first up, we got a little bit of news. So you want to tell us about it, Alan?
Yep, so we have our reviews as always. So first, we'd like to thank those that have taken the time to do it. We've got iPawan85, James K479, Matt PBO, Madam Robot, and Nick Key.
And from Stitcher, we have Rich Club, Brown the Dev, and Shake Yo App. And like Alan said, thank you guys very much for leaving us a review. If you haven't already, we'd greatly appreciate it if you did.
Yep. I do have to say, on Shake Your App, his review I loved because it said it reignited his passion for development. And honestly, that's what this podcast did for me too, because I was kind of hitting a lull. And that was just awesome. I love seeing people say that it got me excited or I started exploring again. You know, that's good stuff.
And speaking of thank yous, I've got to give a huge thank you to Vladimir Vlados. You out there, absolutely abysmal person, even though that's your screen name, but you're not an abysmal person. We love you. You've been a huge help on QIT and keeping me in order. I know it hurts sometimes when I am not able to commit something because one of your pre-commit checks has prevented me from doing something dumb, but I do appreciate it even if I gripe at you about it. So I want to take a minute to say thank you.
Very nice. And so into the couple bits of news that we have, this one was brought up on Slack today, and I actually saw it come across my Google feed the other day. There's this Rockstar programming language, which we'll have a link in the show notes. It's on GitHub, but apparently it's a lot of fun. Like, Joe, I think you've looked into it more than I have, so you want to give a rundown?
I haven't. Angry Zoot sent me the link, or she posted the link in Sock earlier, and so I was taking a look, but it looks amazing. The lyrics, the code, I don't know what you call it, but it's actually more verbose and easier to read, I think, than a lot of my coworkers' code. Just kidding. And the lyrics are definitely much, much better than any of the music that I'm listening to. So you got to take a look at the syntax. It's really fun and really interesting and weird.
A little background here, though, because I don't think this has been said yet. Basically, this is a programming language where the syntax of the language is lyrics from songs.
Yes.
So in order to, you're going to have a pretty good in-depth knowledge of some song lyrics in order to write a program in this.
I think they wanted us to read like FizzBuzz or something on here, but here's a loop. Here's one that's kind of fun. They say, similar to the if statement, a loop is denoted by the while or until keyword, which will cause a subsequent code block to be executed repeatedly whilst the expression is satisfied. So here's some code. Tommy was a dancer. Well, Tommy ain't nothing, knock Tommy down. So that's the kind of code that you're going to see, which sort of hurts my head a little bit. Like,
I mean, you got to sing it. Come on, you can't say it like that.
Okay, you sing it.
I can't sing.
Well, they actually have FizzBuzz is already here. So if you wanted to try it, we could definitely do this if you're ready.
I don't know how we're gonna do it.
I'm trying to figure out like what the tune is for this, but.
Oh, don't overthink it, man. Yeah, it's got to cover the soul. This is rock and roll.
Okay. You know what? I'm already overthinking.
And EAB.
Modulus takes a number and divisor.
While number is as high as divisor. Put number minus divisor into number.
Well, I didn't know you guys were going to embarrass me like that. So, thanks, Angry Zoot. Moving right along.
Oh, yes.
Limit is 100. Counter is 0.
Dun-dun, dun-dun. All right. So, yeah, you guys will have to check this out. It looks like a lot of fun. And then, so the next thing up that I actually think is really cool, this was something that was introduced back in January in the Edge version of the desktop Docker server, client, whatever you want to call it. But now they have moved Kubernetes into the stable desktop Docker app. So now you have Kubernetes support and abilities in your regular Docker on your system without going to Edge. So that's really cool stuff.
Hey, and don't forget, we're going to be talking about Docker and Kubernetes in our next community talk coming up here pretty soon.
Yep, really good stuff. So with that, now I guess it's time to get into this. So as Joe said, this is kind of just going to be our typical what we would have used to done with like our cubicle talk, right? So the one that I wanted to start with, because we've gotten a number of emails from people over the past month or so, maybe even a little bit longer, that are like, hey, I'm just getting started in programming. What should I do? And so I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to kind of share what we think that maybe would help you out the best if you're trying to get started, whether you're coming out of college or whether you're switching careers or whatever. So I guess I'll get the ball rolling. Like, I think to me, probably outside of choosing the language you want to start with, we've mentioned in the past, like, look in your area, find out what's hot in your area. If Java's the big thing, go Java. If it's C#, go C#. JavaScript is always hot everywhere, so that's always a good one to look at. But outside of that kind of stuff, I honestly think one of the things that I've come to realize the more that I've developed over my career, data structures are so important. So I would say after you pick your language, learn about the data structures in that language. If it's C#, your dictionaries, your hash tables, your collections, just everything, man. Like, really learn those things, because when you go to solve a problem, if you know the types of data structures available to you, a lot of times it'll make that problem a lot easier to solve, right? So that's, instead of trying to cram something into an array because you know that arrays are these lists of things that you have, then maybe you'd be a little bit more well-informed about the type that you pick. So that would be my starting point, I think. You guys have anything?
Yeah, have you ever written code where you're like constantly jumping over hurdles to get the data you need? So it's like every function you're like trying to get my objects dot whatever dot items, and then you're like looping through the array to get to whatever you need out of it. You're constantly like writing little helper functions, or whatever, just get the data you need out of it. That's like an example of where you might build or kind of arrange things differently. I think the data structures are really important, but also just the shape of your data, like learning how to kind of separate things logically so that things that change together stay together, and I guess vice versa. So I think that's really important. But I guess that's kind of advanced, so maybe that's not really good getting started.
Yeah, I would just say it kind of goes back to the practice episode, like Code Wars, katas, things like that. Just like practice. Like keep working on that muscle memory, right? Like even if you might already know those data structures, because you could be like a graduating, college, CS student or nearly graduating student. So you might already have a pretty good foundation on some algorithms, data structures, things like that. But, you're trying to get prepared for that job and those job interviews, right? And just working on, through practice problems, it's going to help.
Oh, I got a line I'm going to steal from Shop Talk. Just build websites.
That's kind of true. I mean, if you want to do the absolute hardest thing possible, building a website's right up there, because there's so many pieces involved. We're not talking about HTML, right? We're talking about application.
No, I'm talking about HTML. Like, build a little HTML website. It's going to be terrible. You're going to want to add behavior, but I mean, ultimately, like, it's hard to find a job that doesn't deal with HTML websites in some form. So, depending on how you slice it and what you're doing, what frameworks and WordPress and all that could be really different. But knowing that kind of the base, kind of how the internet and browsers work, I think is really important for just about any job you're going to end up with.
Another thing. I
always kind of viewed that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I always kind of viewed it like, I mean, it really depends on what you want to do there, right? Like if you're like more low level, device driver, operating system level, like creating a website feels like it would be beneath you. Like that doesn't seem at the same level. Like you were saying, it would be the hardest thing. And I'm like, oh, is it really?
Well, it's funny. Not. There's a lot of annoying things with building websites, right? Like cross-browser compatibility. If you get into CSS, like there's just a lot of really, and I don't know that hard is the term I'd use as much as just frustrating, right? Like you're trying to make
drivers.
Yeah, I would imagine like really hard stuff. you know, going back a little bit to the getting started too thing though, like the QIT thing that Joe and, they've all been doing. It's just an open source project, and they get together on calls and they talk about code structure and what they plan on doing and the features and all that. Man, get involved in something like that, right? Because then you'll actually get to see how people are working through problems, right? These pull requests that go in, you'll learn how to use source control. You'll learn what type of features people are trying to add, and then the problems that they run into. And they started off with unit testing, right? I think you guys have that in there or no?
Yeah, just started adding a couple. I've been slacking those, so definitely added it after the fact, which is a little bit tougher, and I've been slow about adding it. But it's been really great just learning what MVP introduced me to the actual testing libraries that we're using. Super good. Dave introduced me to the end-to-end testing that we're using. So, I mean, I've been learning a ton from this. So it's really not my project. I've done like a minority of the work at this point, and I've just been like kind of hanging on and learning. It's been awesome.
But that's a great way for people to learn, right? Is to actually get in there and see how people are interacting and the type of code that's being written and that kind of thing. So,
yeah, for sure. And working with other people is really eye-opening and just really broadens your perspectives. Is really different from working on your own.
Have you guys ever interviewed like interns or anything? Like,
it's been a while.
It's been a long time since I've interviewed anyone.
So one of the things that jumped out at me when I would interview people for internships is, and it's fair, this makes total sense. They come out of school, they've been taking programming for 2-3 years, whatever. And most of them, not being mean, most of them just really didn't know how to write code, right? You tell them, hey, this is what I want. How would you model this, right? And just what you'd see end up on the board, you'd be like, wow, that really doesn't make sense. But I get it, because you've been learning about data structures and all that kind of stuff. So if you haven't put it into practice, it's impossible. And so that's why I say the getting started thing is like Outlaw said, katas, code wars, that kind of thing. Actually writing code that does something is way different than understanding what code's supposed to do, right? When you actually go down to sit down and write your own, different ballgame. You can read an entire book and know what you're trying to do, and then you go to sit down and you'll be back in that book in 5 seconds trying to go to the page like, where did I see that? I mean, we still do it today. So.
Yeah.
So that was my big one. I can't think of anything else. I mean, networking's also a big one outside of that, right? Like, go to meetups, if you're in school, talk to your professors, go to the job fairs and all that kind of stuff. If you're trying to switch careers, surround yourself with other programmers, whether it's in something like our Coding Block Slack channel or
meetups. I mean, you go to meetups, there's always recruiters there. A lot of the meetups that I've gone to, the well-organized meetups, they'll usually have a portion of the talk, either at the beginning or the end, where they allow recruiters or anyone who's like maybe just representing their company looking for, potential hires, to list out like what type of job opportunities they have. And if you want to talk to them, they'll be available after the talk, so you can learn more about it. So meetups are a great opportunity to get out there and network and find out what else is going on in your area.
Yeah, you'd be amazed at how many people, especially in our space programmers, like just try and stay hermits, stay in their house, stay on their keyboards. Man, talking to people, getting into rooms with other people can really open up opportunities. So,
what if you live really far away? What if you live in Alaska? Or on a boat?
What then? I mean, do you, like I said, I think at that point you also get involved in communities online, right? The Coding Block Slack, there's other things as well. GitHub, right? Get involved in open source projects. It is tougher when you're more remote, but I'm sure there's ways to find out, right? You might even post an ad on Craigslist or something. Try not to get mugged and be like, hey, anybody interested in getting together and talking about software? So I don't know. Be creative, right? That's the key. But surround yourself with it. Start playing with it. If you have a project that's in mind, try and make it, as simple as it might be.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to tack on that, it's hard to find other people. It's awkward and it's weird. It's not easy, but it's never, I like to always say, it's never been easier. Like, we've got this great internet thing out there, you can probably find like 10 other Slacks in addition to Coding Blocks for programming type communities within 5 minutes of searching. So you can find something that aligns with your interests and just put yourself out there, be cool and give it a shot, and who knows.
Yeah, there was you made your comment about the programmers are hermits or something like that.
Yeah, they try to be.
Yeah, and no one to stay at home and whatnot. I found this. I posted this in the jobs channel of our Slack, but there was this article trending on Reddit in the programming subreddit about a job board for only remote developer jobs, and you can go and search for like whatever language you want, like work from home jobs just in your area. Like it's eastvox.com. EASTVOX.com. And yeah, it's pretty neat.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
It's for sure crazy to think that exists now, though.
The world is a-changing. That's for sure. Oh, I guess the last thing I would say is also kind of know what you're interested in. This might sound really stupid, right? But I'm sure that people, I said look in your area for what types of jobs are out there. Maybe that's not what you need to do. If you want to make video games for iOS, then start there, right? It's know what you're going to be passionate about and what kind of things will drive you to completing something, right? Because we've all talked about it. Creating side projects and even trying to get them done, or even, staying with them for more than a month, is sometimes really hard. So finding something that you're very interested in will help push that ball forward.
Yeah, and if you are still having trouble with that, you can always build a website for whatever you like. So if you're riding bikes, make a bike website. Find some data, throw it in a database. I don't know. Ask me. Just tweet us or something and say, what should I do for my side project? We'll figure something out.
That's a good point. Yeah, we'll tell you what we want built.
Exactly. That's what I have with QIT.
That's awesome.
All right, so let me ask you guys this. Have you ever wondered why arrays start at 0 instead of 1?
I probably have.
I think I know. Maybe.
I don't think I ever cared enough to look it up, but I've probably had that passing thought, like, why isn't this 1?
So this came up, I think it was in like a Dev2 that I found this, where there was a Medium article, and the headline just, the title was like clickbait enough for me, like, oh yeah, let me click on that. But it was like, why do arrays start with index 0, right? And like you, Alan, I'd never cared. I was, whatever, who cares? But then the answer, I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. So, okay, first of all, let's get this out of the way. There are some languages out there where the arrays do start at 1.
Cold Fusion.
All right, so we'll forget those for a moment, all right? All the COBOL programmers were like, hey, wait a minute, we start at 1. And yeah, we're not talking about that.
No one's proud of that.
Yeah. But for other languages, let's start like C-like languages, right? It's an offset. So if you have an int array, then the pointer, the address of the first element is the same address as the beginning of the array. It's the same. And the second element would be the size of int offset away from that. So it'd be 1 away from it.
Okay.
So it's really fast to know if something's at the 16th. You just take 16, multiply by the size of whatever's stored in there, whether it's a pointer or an integer or whatever. And there you go. There's your memory address.
So it's a hardware-based thing, basically, is what it boils down to.
For true arrays.
Addressing, finding the address space.
Yeah. Now some languages get funky with their, like, what's in their arrays and how their arrays are actually put together. Like maybe they're actually vectors or linked lists under the hood, like JavaScript. But in like a true kind of C-style language, like you have to declare the size of the array when you create it, and that's because the size matters and how you jump around and add those indexes together. It really matters.
Very nice.
So I just thought that would be like a good little reminder, because it's probably been a minute.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah. So then I had this other thought too, though. We talk about code smells a lot, right? And I think we've even said it, and I definitely know I've heard Alan mention this recently. But good good practices in your OO code make for horrible SQL, and good SQL practices make for horrible OO code, right?
Yes.
So then I got to thinking about like, well, hey, then is it a code smell if you have a stored procedure that calls other stored procedures, and those might call other stored procedures? Is that like a code smell? Because then you're treating your stored procedures like they were functions in any kind of other programming language.
Joe.
I can't say anything without shouting. So,
but
it's so hard to work like in SQL Server and probably all the others. It's really hard to work with like the result sets that you get out of stored procedures. So it's really hard to even use stored procedures from stored procedures. And functions are not easy to work with because they can't modify data.
Well, no. Outside of that, though, it's the whole modularity thing that he's talking about, right? Whether you're in MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, whatever.
Yeah. Good luck.
Here's the problem. I think it is a code smell, and it's so unfortunate, right? Because if you're trying to make database operations as fast as possible, then it makes sense to duplicate code. In a nutshell, that's really what it boils down to, right? If you're trying to go for maintainability, which is this whole a stored proc calling in a stored proc with use of functions and whatever, then that makes sense, but you're going to take a hit, right? Because like a function, depending on how they're used or whatever, that thing might have to be called for every single row that comes back in your result set, which is slow because that's an operation on every one of them. But you wanted to be able to reuse this thing in 20 different places. So do you copy out whatever?
I mean, the function one, though, I've got a total workaround on how you can get around that, though.
Okay.
You could just get the results of the function into a temp table and then join on that temp table in your other table. That way you're not recalculating that function over and over.
You could do that.
So you could take the hit of calculating it at one time. So you still have the function that you can reuse in all your other procs. But yeah, there was a code base that I was looking into, and it was like, one stored procedure calls another stored procedure, and then that stored procedure calls another stored procedure, and they're like passing around user-defined types all over the place. And I'm just like, man, this feels like it's got to be like we're treating stored procedures like they're functions in any other language, but that kind of feels wrong.
Yeah.
But I understand the intent. I understand why, like you said, like it's about maintainability, but at the same time, it's like,
I mean, that's the big thing, right? Like, and you'll typically see this when developers cross. Like, if you're an application developer, you think in terms of objects and things that you are going to massage, right? The one item, right? I'm going to modify the Mike object or the Joe object. That's how you think. When you go into the database world, you have to think in sets because that's how it is optimized to run. And the problem is crossing those two is typically a bad idea because if you have a SQL statement and those tables are indexed a particular way to work that way, well, then you probably need to write your SQL to be that way every single time. When you start cascading that, you called that proc because it was going to give you this result set, but then you call another proc to give you another result set, and then you're going to join those there. You probably lost a lot of the efficiencies if you had just gone and joined the tables yourself, right? So it's frustrating, and I hate this answer, but I honestly think that the better, if you're going for performance, it's better not to pass around shared or common code, right?
So everything you've learned about clean code from Uncle Bob, throw it away when you start writing your SQL. That's what I'm hearing.
For sure. Yep, absolutely. You'll just go crazy trying to reconcile those two.
I mean, have you guys found anywhere where that wasn't the case, where you would have rather seen the functions, or has it ever not bitten you having an OO type approach in your database?
No, it does never work out well for me.
Okay.
And SQL's great. Like I know I tend to pick on SQL. It's fantastic. It's used by like everyone and forever, and will be used forever and ever. But it's definitely got some downsides when it comes to like maintainability. That's what it is.
But I will say, though, that brings up another question. I guess without going too far off topic here, though, we've talked about this in the past. Do you put your logic and whatnot in the database, or do you put it in your application? Maybe if you're putting it in your application, you don't have to worry about this stuff as much, right? Like you have some sort of service layer that's helping with that. Maybe. I don't know.
Depends on what kind of logic we're talking about there. Like logic can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people.
It can.
I mean, if you're putting your logic in stored procedures, and you're implying the database is the heart of that application and that ecosystem. And if you're okay with that, then you're okay with that. But if you want to start introducing like a search engine or some like other data storage mechanisms, or now you've got different types of databases, and you've got like a really big type application or ecosystem, then it's hard to really have one system that's at the heart of it, and so that kind of falls apart.
Well, it's not even just the heart at that point. It's your heart and your brain, right? Like it's all of it. It's the entire
central nervous system.
Organism, right? Yeah, that's so. Here's where, and this is where some of my thinking goes. So I recently tried to do a little thing to where I was pulling out data and it was joining two massive sets of or actually many tables together. And all I was trying to do was pull data out. And it took hours because I'm joining millions of records against millions of records against, another hundreds of thousands of records, and just trying to get all that stuff together. It was struggling. Now, granted, you can beef up the hardware, but there's only a certain point that you can do that, right? And it gets really expensive. So this is where I'm going with the whole application thing. And one day I want us to talk about this stuff in depth, but like Kafka streams or any type of MapReduce type problem, if you're talking about like Hadoop or something like that, in Kafka streams, what you can do is you can pull in a stream of data from a table. So you're not joining all your tables at once, right? Like you're not trying to join 10 different tables and get that stuff out, which is an expensive operation. You get a stream in that contains the table information for one, right? And as data comes in for another one, the streams, you'll have a bunch of little applications running everywhere that puts that data together, mashes it up, and then sends it off to wherever you want it to be, right? So it can actually be faster than hitting your SQL or your relational database trying to join all that data together, because now you have a bunch of little applications that can quickly chew through that stuff, right? So it's an interesting concept. I just bring that up because if you do it that way, you're actually writing applications in an OO type way using streams, as opposed to trying to modularize your SQL database or your relational database type thing.
Yeah, I mean, hitting on a point that you made a moment ago, one of you guys made about the oh shoot, now I even lost my train of thought. You hate it when that happens?
Uncle Bob, central nervous system.
No, what was it now?
Functions, modularity, maintainability.
Something to do with SQL.
Indexes.
No, it'll come to me.
Got nothing.
All right.
Yeah, but I agree. It is a code smell. It's funny. It's a code smell in that that performance is going to suffer. But it's the inverse of a code smell because you now have maintainable code in SQL, right? So
I remembered it now. It was about the heart of it, the central nervous system, the heart of it. Like I'm all for, not keeping that in your database. I like that idea because, one thing that we've learned over the years, right, is that you can only scale, like take SQL Server, for example. Let's beat up on SQL Server for a moment. You can only scale that thing, but so big, right? You can only get so much of a server for it before you just can't buy any more hardware, right? Because the next version of whatever's, faster memory or faster SSD or whatever you need isn't available yet, right? So if you keep that in your application tier, then you can spin up more servers, right? So you can scale horizontally instead of vertically, right? So I like that idea. But yeah, it was just the main thing that the main theme behind this though was like, at what point do you try to recognize that, hey, I think we're treating this SQL like it was any other language, and we should put a stop to this. Like we should recognize this as an anti-pattern and stop.
I agree with that. But then that begs the question of, well, how are people going to try and fix that, right? Then people are going to start storing their SQL in tables and have it try and create things, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah, I wasn't going that far.
Well, no, that's the commonality, right? Like people don't want to duplicate code, right? Like it's almost, even SQL developers don't want to duplicate that code, but a lot of times you have to make it performant. So,
Well, okay, this is a great point though, because it's why do we not want to duplicate code? Because it's been ingrained in our head that it's bad. It's been beaten into us over the years that duplicated code is a bad thing. But what Uncle Bob taught us is that there's true duplication and then there's accidental duplication, right? And you might copy and paste something in there and make it more performant, and you might think, oh, I'm duplicating code, but it might not be, because if it changes for different reasons at different times, then it's not true duplication.
but I don't think that's the case in SQL. What you're saying is absolutely true when we were talking about the O stuff. But I would venture to say that if you're using the same where clause all over the place because that's how you have to filter your data down based off some business rule, you're duplicating it, right? To make it fast. You're inlining that code to make your query perform well, right?
But I'm thinking of the case where like maybe you have a block of code where you are, doing some pre-selection of data and you're putting it into like a temp table or whatever, or CTE. And, you might be tempted to like put that into some other, stored procedure that could return it back or whatever, so that you could like quote dedupe it. But it might not be a bad thing if you had that same section of code in a second stored procedure, right? Because then if the first one changed for a different reason and the second one was okay to leave it as is, those are changing for different reasons.
But then there's the inverse problem where they were supposed to be the same, but somebody only knew about the first one and changed it. That's where it gets complicated, right? And
this is hard. Can we just stop?
Well, to be fair, too, like 99% of applications aren't going to run into like horrible scaling problems with SQL Server or whatever SQL database they're using. It's going to be fine for whatever website or whatever small application they're doing, and they're never going to run into these, they're never going to run out of hardware for the applications they're working on.
You don't think so, really, though?
I would say 99% of applications don't have to go to like Google scale.
No, I agree with that, but I do think that at some point, like I've seen it in so many different things I've worked on, is there's a breaking point when data reaches a certain level to where it's like everything was fine yesterday and today it's not.
Yeah, it's hitting a wall.
I mean, listen, man, I can write enough bad queries and add enough indexes to any query to make it perform bad enough to where you'll think that you're at Google scale. Just give me 5 minutes with your query.
I mean, I guess that's the thing though. Like you're joking about it, but it is true, right? Like, and I'm not talking about like your typical WordPress type site or anything like that, where there's a database behind the thing. But I think that a lot of times, especially homegrown applications, they grow to a point to where it's like, wow, this thing performed great, and we didn't expect it to be in use a year and a half later, and now the data's grown out of control, and now my modular SQL doesn't work so well. And now we've got to revisit this and get rid of the modularity and go more performant.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a great topic.
So make sure that you have to pass around user-defined types. Is that a code smell?
Oh, they're no fun to work with. So I'm going to say yes. They're stinky.
You just got to make those generic user-defined types.
Ultimately, I think they're a good thing. Like user-defined, I don't know what it's like in other databases, but I know in SQL Server, it's annoying to work with because of how you have to kind of fill them in and work with them. But ultimately, it's good. Like you add a column and like it'll let you know every single place that you have to drop and recreate in order to even work on it. So it's good for maintaining that kind of type safety, which I'm a fan of. Or at least I used to be until I went full on JavaScript.
All right, so we have blank topics for Joe. What's this one?
Do you guys listen to The Indicator? It's the podcast from Planet Money, short little topics, economics.
Never heard of it.
No? Okay, good. So they play a game called Over Under sometimes. They'll bring on a special guest, and they'll ask them about a particular topic or question, and they'll say, is this underrated, overrated, or, kind of meh? So we're gonna play Over Under. And we're just going to go in alphabetical order. Well, no, not quite. We're going to go Alan, Outlaw, and Joe. just to make things easy and consistent because I got a bunch of questions here.
That's
Wait, you're
totally
gonna ask
not
yourself
alphabetical.
a question? How's that going to work?
Well, I already know the answers.
Uh,
You'll see. It'll be fine. All right. So, yeah, I've trapped you guys. Wahaha. All right. So, first topic, remote work. Alan, underrated, overrated, or,
Wait, what was it?
remote work.
Yeah.
Is it overrated?
Just fine.
Okay. Outlaw.
Yeah, I'm in the just fine category.
Yeah, I think it's about right, too. What about standing desks?
So there's just under, over, or just fine? There's not awesome?
No, awesome. So awesome would be like, I think it's awesome and people don't even know how awesome it is.
So that would be underrated.
That would be underrated.
Underrated.
Okay. Outlaw.
Because I have standing desk envy, I guess I have to say underrated.
Yeah, I'm going to say under too. I love mine and I think that it's way better than people think.
Agreed.
It's going to start getting harder. So your palms getting sweaty?
I have like a ridiculously expensive ergonomic chair, and I spend so much time seated in it that it's still, like I have to get up because it's like, God, my butt hurts. Why?
Yeah.
Well, hey, that makes for a good one. What about fancy chair? Alan, over, under, or fine?
Fine.
Okay. Outlaw.
I guess overrated.
You think it's overrated as in like people think it's too good?
Oh, well, I mean, like that's why I'm going with the wanting the standing desk, right? It's because I have the chair.
Okay.
I have a Herman Miller Arion chair that I sit in, and yet, because my doctor was like, yeah, no, you have to go out and get an ergonomic chair, right? And so, like, after looking around, I was like, okay, well, I guess this is the one I need to get. So, stupid amount of money, but fine, I'll buy it. And now, I still spend so much time seated in it, then it's like, oh, I'm still in pain. This thing's overrated.
Yep.
All right. Fair
I mean,
enough.
I love the chair. Don't get me wrong. But
What about you, Joe?
I think they're overrated, but that's just because I don't really care much about it. Like I'm not spending $500 or up.
But man, I will say I got to add a little bit to this. It's not overrated because a quality chair doesn't creak and pop, and it'll freaking last a long time. Like there's other benefits to it, right? Like $100 chair will last you a year, and you're going to be tossing it, right?
oh yeah.
So yeah,
I don't even know how long I've had this one.
Yeah.
I've had it forever.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like you buy a quality chair. That's why I don't want to say they're overrated. I think so. Anyway, yeah, I'm not trying to swing your vote, but yeah, all right.
All right.
But he's trying to swing.
I'll try to swing your vote.
I'm trying to, but if he happens to,
Right.
well, that's just coincidence.
So what about MacBook Pros?
Oh man, nowadays I feel like it's over, and I hate to say that, but I think they're overrated for what do you get?
As soon as they, well, I want to say as soon as they introduced the touch bar, they were overrated. But honestly, I kind of feel like as soon as they went Retina, it went overrated. Because like I still feel like my model MacBook Pro was the last good one.
Where you could upgrade it.
Yeah, where you could open up, you could change out the memory in the hard drive if you wanted to. Yeah, it's a little bit thicker because it has you can plug an Ethernet cord into it without a dongle, and yeah, it's got a DVD player. But I love the Retinas, but yeah, those touch bar ones especially overrated. Now they have the i9s that overheat.
Well, they fixed it apparently.
The software? Yeah.
Software. There was somebody that actually went and did a video, and they showed it after the update, and it's fast. But yeah. So what about you, Joe? Over, under? Over. Yeah.
With Outlaw.
That's sad, man.
I know. What about programming books?
Ooh, programming books.
Underrated.
Under.
Okay. I think so too.
Okay.
So you know what the next question is.
Which programming books though are we talking about? Like, are we talking about like a particular language, or are we talking about like some of those like the Clean Code series that like span any type of language or topic?
I meant either one, like up to interpretation. Sounds like we're all on the same page for the most part.
Yeah, they're valuable.
Yeah,
Well,
obviously you can get one on
like books on Git, for example. Git isn't a programming language, but there's books on it, right?
Yeah.
And the Angular 1 book I've got isn't very valuable anymore. What about online courses?
Underrated.
I'll go with under also. It depends on the price.
I'm gonna say just fine.
Okay.
There's so many free ones though.
There are,
Yeah.
and that's why, yeah.
Yeah,
Like-
video I think is great, but I think everyone knows it's great.
I've been a big fan of Coursera here lately, going through their catalog. So yeah, I mean, and just like the amount of free stuff that you can get from like legit, like serious, college and
professors.
universities that are out there. They're putting this content out there that you can go and like, take this class for free and learn it.
It's unreal.
Yeah. Well, speaking of colleges, well, what about algorithms? Like learning algorithms as a programmer.
I think it is. Man, if I was in school, I would be like overrated. I think now that I've been a developer for a while, I'd say it's underrated.
Ella, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm somewhere in that ballpark with you. I'm somewhere between underrated and just fine.
Yeah,
I'm somewhere between that. So like whatever that is,
under fine.
like it's just under.
Under fine.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm gonna go with fine. I think there's pros and cons. Some people really need them, some people not so much, and so I'm just gonna say right down the middle.
I like it.
What about native apps? Like if you were to develop a native app.
Overrated.
All right.
I'll wait for his
Just
answer.
Fine. Because if it's a game, just fine. I'm going to go just fine.
I'm gonna say over.
Huh.
Here's my reason. Let's take games out of the equation because, well, I mean, games can kind of come into this equation too. Unless you need a specific, some specific subsystem of the device, then I think that you can get by with just a web app just fine.
Probably.
Right? Take out the marketing side of the equation where marketing's like, no, but we want the icon on the phone. That's important real estate to us. So take that part out because that's about feelings. And we're not talking about feelings here. This isn't a feelings show. But, and by subsystems on the phone, I mean like if you need access to GPS data or you need,
it's hard to even reach because nowadays you have access to most of that, right?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of one, but so games might need to actually get to lower level systems because they might want to get to something like I keep thinking of Core ML, but what's the other one?
OpenGL or
no, on iOS. I'm trying to remember the iOS stack, but I can't at the moment. But yeah, that's why I'm thinking like, you might need to get to that Metal is what I'm trying to think of. That you need to have access to that framework, that library. So in order for your game to perform. So I would include games in that category of you need access to a specific subsystem. And in that case, the subsystem might be the video processor. That, you're not going to have that in a browser.
You said fine, and Joe, you also said fine.
No, I said overrated.
Overrated. You said overrated too, right, Joe?
Yep. Nicholas showed me the way. I'm fully on board with PWA because I don't want to install another app. Let me just use the internet.
Yeah, true that.
Relational databases.
Just fine.
All right. Me too.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think they're important. They still play a crucial role. I think that in some places they're way overused, in other places they probably should have been used. So yeah, they're just fine.
What about NoSQL? You didn't know this was going to be a painful episode, huh?
Man,
Jacking you guys over the coals.
I would say underrated.
I
want to say under. Maybe that's just because my current.
Yeah, what we work in. I think I'll also go under because I think just a lot of people grew up in the relational world and they don't understand the place for the document world.
Fair enough. What about?
No, you didn't answer. What was yours?
Oh, I'm fine with it.
You're fine. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's one of those ones that averages out. Unit testing.
Underrated.
Under.
You?
Under.
Okay.
It's hard though, so I'm tempted to say fine.
No, but that's why it's so underrated though. People don't understand the value of it. Like if you take the time to break out your app enough to where you can write unit tests on it up front, like what that buys you long term in regards to it not having baked in dependencies and the portability that's going to come with that.
Yep.
Not to mention the maintainability of it and how fast you can iterate on it. Totally underrated.
What about Docker?
Oh man, that's so hard because I want to say
The hype is high.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The hype is so high. So I'm going to go with fine. I don't think it's overrated. I think it's important. So are we talking Docker or are we talking containers?
Docker.
Same Docker? I'll still go fine.
Man. Yeah. I guess I'm in the fine category.
You, Joe?
I'm fine. I think it averages out. I think there's a lot of hype, but I think it's really important and interesting. So,
yep.
What about TypeScript?
We're
almost done.
I think it's underrated.
I don't know, though, man. That's the thing that you like about JavaScript is that it is loosey-goosey.
Yep.
I love it, but I've heard enough people say that they were able to speed up development by 2x because I had type checking and, just the safety built into it.
So you took away all the things that made JavaScript awesome to make it work like every other compiled language.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Outlaw, you're over?
Yeah, I am kind of leaning more towards the over, but I am kind of like finding it humorous though, like as I listen to myself, because I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure if we go back to like the early episodes, like Coding Blocks year 1,
yeah,
totally like hating on JavaScript and its loosey goosiness and everything, but now it's like, okay, fine, don't take all that away from it.
Yeah,
let it be, man. It never hurt you.
What about Joe? What was yours on TypeScript?
I think it's fine. I think that possibly a little bit underrated. Like I'm glad it's out there. I think that ES6 is really cool. I'm kind of personally more excited about that. So I'm not that excited about TypeScript, but it's kind of nice to have the option to do some static stuff if you want to. So cool. Whatever. And we're all doing pre-processing nowadays anyway, so why not?
Yeah.
What about .NET Core?
I think it's fine right now. It's got a lot of hype, but I think that's legitimate hype being cross-platform and all that. So I say it's fine.
I'm going to say it depends. Like it could be totally overrated.
You got to pick one.
No. Hear me out. If you don't need it for your particular application, it's totally overrated.
I think it's you're saying. So it's like if you're not a .NET developer or you're not doing things outside of Windows, it's like
outside of Windows would be the thing. Yeah.
No, I don't even mean that. I don't even necessarily mean outside of Windows. You could be doing Windows development and just, maybe you're working in an older code base or something like that, and you haven't run into a need for the things that .NET Core is going to buy you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like that kind of portability, for example, that it's going to buy you, then it's like, it's overrated. It's nice. It's awesome. It's cool. I'm not taking any of that away from it. But it's a case by case.
This one comes along with my Docker for the ride, though. Man, I can put my .NET Core in my Docker and run it on Linux, on Mac, on whatever.
If you needed that portability.
Everybody
but if you don't need that portability.
You don't know you need it yet, but you need it.
Yeah. I mean, no, you're right.
What about you, Joe?
So I'm going to go with under because of the Docker situation that's kind of evolving. I think it's easier to deal with it there. I think the way we're kind of building things is really cool. I like that I can deploy on Linux and work on my Mac easier. So I'm on board.
It actually
so
makes
you're saying
sense.
Underrated.
Yeah, he's
underrated.
You know what? I mean, I think it's a huge part of the Microsoft strategy, right? Like when you look at their Azure cloud offerings, like it was initially all Windows type stuff, right? And they quickly started shifting towards containers and Linux and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is why .NET Core is such a big deal to them. So,
what about functional programming?
Overrated.
Over.
I got to say over too. Like I'm sure there's people out there that are using that and, that it's really important to them, but not to me and not to most programmers I know. So.
Well, here's my reason for saying over is that like there's some awesome stuff in them. I'm not trying to take that away. There's not only I know that there are a lot of developers out there that work in those languages, and the languages themselves are elegant and they have so many awesome features about them. But if they were everything that they're hyped up to be, then they would be the norm. I kind of feel, right? Is that wrong?
Maybe. I mean, that's almost like saying SQL databases or relational databases would have been replaced too, right? I don't know. It's to me, it's more about the hype of it with, oh, you should be doing functional programming. Why? You know, but like,
I mean,
why?
Haskell isn't on the same level as a JavaScript or
No.
a Java or a C#, right? And I'm not trying to take anything away from it. Like it's a crazy awesome, the syntax in it, the features in it are awesome, but it's not there in terms of the same popularity. So why is that? Right? Is it because it's being overhyped? Is it because like functional languages being overhyped? Because if it was everything that was supposed to be, wouldn't everybody have moved to it? Maybe that's just the wrong thinking.
I don't know.
I'm going to get the backlash. So listen, if you don't like that comment, send your emails to Joe.
That's right.
That's right. That was Joe speaking. No.
You can find him on the Slack channel.
Did we end the? Are we at the end of the list, or we got
We
some?
got two more. Sorry, I didn't think it would be so long.
No, let's
Yeah,
do it.
no
Sorry.
worries. This is fun.
That's us. We like to talk.
What about machine learning?
Ooh, I think
I had to go there.
I think that one's fine. I think there's a lot of hype, but I think there's a reason for the hype. I think we're going to melt all the polar ice caps for this, but I think it's fine.
I mean, it's definitely, if you go to some trade shows, it seems overrated when like every booth you talk to, they're talking about their machine learning. You're like, all right, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, man. Why'd you have to ask?
Now you hit his soul.
Yeah.
He's not going to sleep tonight because he's like, did I answer this one right?
Yeah.
There's no right answer, only wrong ones.
He still hasn't answered them.
I haven't. No.
Joe, what's yours?
Because I kind of want to say underrated because I think that it should be in more places. I think it should be more ubiquitous. It should just be everywhere.
Okay, so
I'm going to go with underrated.
all right. You, Joe?
I'm going to say over just because the hype is so high, man. If you listen to like machine learning podcasts, like 5 minutes in, they're talking about like the singularity and aliens and time travel. So I just can't. It's hard for me to stomach when things take such a ginormous leap when I can't get freaking Siri to call my wife. So
I mean, let's not hold it to Siri though. That's a bad example. Siri.
I was like ordering a pizza. I'm like, nope, cancel.
Listen, I've already said Siri like 3 times and my phone still hasn't lit up, nor has my watch. They're all like, I don't care.
I said, call my wife. Pizza on the way.
You go to anyone's house after they get like their Echo Dot or whatever, like within that first week. They're like, oh, check it out, play Bob Dylan. And it's like added to laundry list or, whatever. Ordering Tide Free. Like, man.
Trying the Tide Pod Challenge.
Yeah.
So true.
So I think it's really useful, and I agree with both of you guys. I mean, I think I'll particularly I think that it could be used in a lot more places, a lot more effectively, but it's just so oversold. Like you'll talk to people, they'll tell you about the machine learning and AI, and then you find out they're doing like k-means in like 1% of the application, and they branded themselves as alien wizards or whatever.
I do think it gets oversold a lot from a marketing perspective.
It does.
Yeah.
All
okay,
right.
one more. You know what it is? No, Outlaw, you got to guess?
Rockstar programming language.
What kind of cheese would you have in your refrigerator?
Yeah, that cheese dust comes up all the time.
Obviously, it'd have to be powdered. The answer's powdered.
Okay, well, I mean, it's got to be blockchain. How can we not talk about blockchain?
I was going to say Bitcoin. Yeah, okay, good.
Blockchain, I think it's so misunderstood. I think that
overrated.
Its use cases, man.
Overrated.
I'm going to go with underrated right now.
Under?
No, I'm going to go with just fine. I can't say underrated because there's too much hype. I'm going to say it's just fine.
All right, and I'm kind of curious here. So,
wait, what's yours?
Oh, yeah, over.
Overrated. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It just I hear oversold, but I think a lot of it has to do with my echo chamber. Like I almost exclusively talk to programmers. I almost exclusively read like programming websites, and so it's like stamped into my forehead and eyeballs by now. So
Right.
I'm a little over it, but doesn't mean it's bad. So who do you think had the most unders, overs, and fines out of the three of us?
Oh man, the most overs is you.
Is this like a Cosmo test or something? Like,
The most overs was you. The most unders was Mike, and the most fines was me.
All right, let's see. This is actually really hard to count up. I wish I had done this.
you should have had like a spreadsheet for it or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you guys should talk amongst yourselves, and I'll with the totals here.
If you had just used machine learning, this would have been done, man.
Yeah.
And the blockchain would have verified it along the way.
And
So-
you could have written it in a functional language, and it would
That's
have
right.
been
If you had done
beautiful. It would have
functional-
been easy.
Mhm.
No state to worry about.
That's right. It would have always been verifiable.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't,
actually, I think I'm pretty close here. Actually, so if we just hang on if I just keep talking long enough. So as for the fines, Alan was number one with 8, and I think I got a total of 17 there. So half of those you said were fine. I said 7. Outlaw only said 4.
Oh
4
man,
were fine.
Can I say something about my personality then? That I'm like, not that optimistic about life and everything. I'm like, everything's down.
or it's everything's way up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're high or low.
The peaks and the valleys.
All right. And for unders, let me count mine. Okay, so Alan and Alan, you're actually tied. Both of you said 7 things were underrated.
Okay.
Yep. So
I mean-
now I could just do math here.
What was yours for the unders?
4.
Mm.
Oh,
Yep.
And the overs were him by a long shot.
Yeah, the overs for me. No, not true. So the overrateds, me and Outlaw were tied. Both said 8.
ah.
Yeah. So Outlaw or Alan, rather, you were low man on total player. So none of us ever got below 4 on any of these. But it is interesting to see that we had a clear winner. Like Alan thought the most stuff was fine. You guys were tied on underrated, and Outlaw and I were tied on overrated.
So I walked the middle line. That's kind of where I stay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
So I am totally bipolar. Guess I will go see a doctor about that. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
I didn't know as we diagnosed on the show.
Yeah, you don't have any weak opinions. They're all strong.
They are. They are. So
Isn't that most developers though?
that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
developers. So it's that time of the show where we're going to ask you, please, if you haven't already, do go leave us a review. As mentioned, we do read them. We appreciate the time, the feedback, and it is awesome to hear you folks share, how it's helping you or getting you energized or whatever. So please do, if you find the time, you're sitting around, tapping away on your phone, reading your Google News, and you think of us, head to codingblocks.net/review and drop us a few words. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and we've asked this before too. Spread the word. Share it with a friend. Tell a friend about the show. If you think that they might be interested, if they listen to podcasts and you think that they enjoy listening to programming podcasts, let them know. And with that, let's head into my favorite portion of the show. Survey says. We just did a survey.
We got to get you to work on the Steve Harvey voice now.
Oh, the Steve Harvey voice?
Yeah, we got to get that going.
Okay. I guess that's my homework for the next couple of weeks is watch a lot of Steve Harvey Family Feud.
Oh, man, that's amazing. All right.
I guess it's just like the era of like when you grew up watching whatever you watched,
It
right?
is.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So last episode, we asked, what is your most productive time of day? And your choices were morning. Got to get my work done before the rest of the office gets in. Or midday. Let everyone else go to lunch. I'm getting this commit merged. Or evening. I'll let the traffic die down while I close one more ticket. And lastly, night. Now that all the meetings are over, I can finally start my day. So, Joe, we'll start with you. What do you think the listeners picked?
Morning, 26%.
Morning at 26%. And he sounded confident. He wasted no time with that, Alan.
You know what's funny is I'm going to go morning also
Uh-oh.
at 27%.
Oh, you're not going $1 it? Okay.
No, I'm gonna have to go one over. But honestly, for me, it's night. But I think most people will try and get a jump on it. So
Night for you. What about you, Joe? You're a morning person, Joe.
Yep, yeah, morning person.
That's why you said morning.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm with both of you. I agree with Joe that morning is totally the time where I can be the most productive. Like you're well rested, you're fresh and everything. But I'm a night owl by nature, so like it's hard for me to get up in that morning to do that.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm like torn. This goes back to my bipolarness. Well, Alan wins.
Sweet.
Morning, 57%.
Whoa, okay.
57% of the vote. By far and away, the number one pick.
Night was number 2, wasn't it?
No.
Really?
No, it was evening. But they were really close.
Okay.
Yeah, they were like, a percentage point away from each other.
I remember going into an office, I would actually try and show up before everybody else so I could get work done. Like that was...
Yeah, but don't you feel like a sleazebag leaving before everybody else? Like, even if you know you're good, you just...
Did we ever? No, I'd still stayed until everybody else was gone, right? Like that was the problem with being the early bird too, is it was like I was the late bird, the early bird. Yeah.
Yeah. No, see, that was another reason why I didn't want to be the early bird. Like early in my career, I had no problems coming in, like being like the late kind of morning person to come in because I knew I was going to stay late. And it was like, well, why would I bother to come in early if I know I'm going to stay late? So...
Yeah, lose my whole day.
But even though, like, I knew that mentally I was more refreshed in the morning, though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, for this survey, we give away a lot of books. So we're going to ask, what's your favorite book type? Hardcover, because I want to protect my investment, or paperback. I like to curl the cover back with one hand while I read it. Or ebook, it's the only chance I won't lose it. Or books, I ain't reading no books.
I love it's the only chance of ours.
It's so true though, right?
It is.
Because you know that Amazon's got that backed up for you. You don't have to worry about it.
I can't say what mine would be because I feel like I'd be swaying the vote.
Yeah, you can't do that.
I'll do it next time.
Yeah.
All right. So into the next part here again. So my second thing was we've talked about a lot of patterns on this show over time. We've described them, you've gone into detail, whether it was good or bad, and gone over a bunch of patterns. And one of the things I've noticed, and this came up with caching specifically that I saw, is a lot of times that would be very localized to pieces of code. And so if you saw that you're updating somewhere, you would update the cache right there. And then nothing else would be aware of that particular data. So it would go somewhere else to get that data. And so you would have these caches that were out of sync, right? The same data in two different places were referencing, one was referencing a cached version and the other one was, going to the database or something and it had been updated. It always got out of sync. And it's not just caching, but anything like that to where you're using the same type of data all throughout your application, but there's only little places where you do certain things to them, like a cache or something like that. I think it's important to remember the patterns that exist. So, for instance, one of the ones that we talked about was the pub sub, right? The publish subscribe. When I look at that, I say, well, there's got to be a better pattern, right? Instead of having all the cache happen in, say, like a controller or something, there should be a higher order type place where the caching takes place so that if you change the data somewhere, fire an event off that gets caught by an event bus or some sort of event actioning system that gets floated up. And now, whether it's a repository or what, knows that, hey, there's something that just changed, refresh, push that into the cache, right? And then that way, every place in your code doesn't have to know about it. There's a more centralized place that is handling that kind of thing. And I've just seen that. I've seen I've seen like sprawl of code like that where, it started off pretty small and it wasn't that bad. But then over time, as more people start adopting those caching mechanisms or whatever it might be, then you start having these little you start finding these bugs all over the place because, wait, it says this over here, but over here it's different. And it's because, oh, well, they didn't implement the same cache, or they did the cache a little bit different, or it's not using the same key, or whatever it might be. And so when you start seeing situations like that, it goes back to the whole code smell thing is, okay, how can we put in something that will centralize this or give us a way to have better insights as to what's going on? So just curious what you guys thought about that.
Have I told you guys about my caching strategy?
No, don't do it.
Don't be the one to do it.
That's probably pretty good.
Yeah, give it to Outlaw. I mean, give it to somebody else.
No, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I've been tasked with writing a couple caching abstractions before, and it's no fun task because like you kind of get blamed for everything. You do. It's always your fault when it doesn't work. So it's like, yeah, kind of like what Joe said is like, you don't want to be the guy that has to do it.
Somebody always wants it to be done differently. It's always like just kind of messy when it comes to things that kind of overlap and yeah.
Well,
and you can't help you were talking about like the keys and, someone might be using the wrong key. And it's like, yeah, you can't, there's only but so much you can do to protect the end user from themselves. And in this case, the end user is another developer, but there's only but so much you can do to protect them from themselves.
And that's why it's weird, because I think this actually goes to better overall system design. And it's something you don't typically find out at the beginning of a project, right? It's something you find out as a project goes on is, oh, wait a second, we've got this user object and wait a second, they've got a different user object. They should probably be the same user object, right? Like whatever they're trying to do with it, they should probably be using the same thing. And so it kind of goes back to proper design saying, okay, now we have a user object that everybody should use. And if properties change on that, there should be some sort of event, fires off, and then something knows to go update a cache or whatever. And I think it just goes to a bunch of disconnected silos of code is where you typically see this problem. And you only find out about that as time goes on and you start seeing these problems, right?
Or maybe it's just a pattern of like, if you had, this might be the wrong word for it, but maybe if you had like a repository in front of it as to how you would even get that user object, then that repository would know whether or not it wanted to cache something, and if the property changed, it needed to add it or update the cache with the new value or whatever, right? But by not having that repository abstraction layer in between it, then yeah, you could have some places where it's like, oh, I'm just going to go and directly get it, and other places where it's like, no, I'm going to try to get it from the cache, right? And so there's that disconnect there.
Yep, and that's what I'm talking about with the design is just over time. If you've got a bunch of people working on it, or it doesn't even have to be a bunch of people, but one person's doing it differently than another, you have this disconnect, and that's when you almost have to take a step back and start drawing some boxes and say, hey, how is this thing being used and where is it being used so that we can start identifying these problems and get these bugs out of the system.
It kind of makes me wonder. Go ahead, Joe. You were going to say
something. No. Yours is better.
Nobody said a word yet.
Well, I was kind of shifting the topic. That's why I was going to let you go speak on the caching thing. But it was, it's kind of thinking like, because I've had this thought too. Like, is it better to have a team of people, like regardless of what your size your team is, where everybody's working on the same thing and they're like all hands are in the same code base? Or is it better to where you split it up to where everybody has small pieces of the overall thing that they're responsible for, and that way they can know their one piece of the puzzle extremely well, and they can have an opportunity to refine it? Because where I'm kind of coming from with this is that it feels like my experience has been in the world where everybody has their hands in everything, then everyone is treated as interchangeable, and therefore you don't really get the opportunities to
Specialize.
well, specialize is one word for it, but I was going to say like refine an area, like, to keep refactoring and cleaning up an area because, as new features come in, because before you know it, you're tasked with moving on to something else and someone else is brought in after you to work on that area. And they might not have known like the things that you wanted to address and, eventually, or I don't know. Like I struggle with like, what is the right answer there? Like,
I always like the 2 pizza rule. Have you heard that one?
okay. Well, I mean, it starts with pizzas. So
Yeah.
are they the meat lovers?
No, I guess it's the Amazon thing. It's basically like trying to have teams that don't exceed 2 pizzas, which for me is like 3 people and very large pizzas. Haha.
Oh, that's interesting.
But yeah, just the idea of like keeping teams smaller and
Right.
not exceeding too many people, but just because it gets kind of the communication overhead is rough and it doesn't give people the same kind of level of ownership.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I met a developer from Spotify at, I don't even remember which conference it was now. And, I mean, he was talking about the way their teams were structured. And if I remember it correctly, it was definitely very like, you might have had like maybe a half dozen people total on the team, but every person on that team had a very specialized part of the overall puzzle. So they would, work on that handful of people would be responsible for delivering like one feature. Like, let's say if it was like, ad content, right? Inside of the application. And, that was what they did. But, one of the people on that team might be more about the graphics for it. Another person might be for the JavaScript part of it, things like that. Like it was very, you're still kind of specialized.
I have no good answer for this.
Yeah.
I think that I like the pizza thing. I never heard of that, but I do like it. If you have a few people working on something, then it makes it easier to manage. Like you said, communication doesn't scale. Communication is probably the hardest thing there is, right? I like that. Man, as a full stack developer though, it kills me. Like if somebody says you're working on the UI and you're the UI only, I'm gonna be like,
it doesn't have to be like that though.
No,
I never said you had to work in one technology. Just like the area that you're working in could just be a feature.
Yeah,
right?
It could be, but then you're almost the one guy, right? Like if you're working in one area and you're not just in a particular stack, which correct, you could be going across the stacks, but then you're not really working with anybody on something. You know what I mean? Then it's more like you're doing it. And that, yeah, it's more solo type stuff. So it's a tough one, man. Like I do like the idea of a few people owning an area because then you can refine the patterns, you can refine the design, you can refine the code, you can do all that kind of stuff. And what I like about that more than anything is it might be that you picked up something good from each other, right? You found some patterns that worked, and now you go replicate that in other areas that you work on. And it might be that you're working together in another area, or it might be that you're working with somebody else, but you start getting good patterns going around, right? Man, it's so hard because then the flip side to that is working on a small feature is, depending on how big your application is, this almost goes back to the whole caching problem that I even brought up here, is you're not aware of how they're caching things over there. And so you have the same type object or same need, but you're not aware of their cache. And so you're getting data differently than what they were. And this is where it's hard.
I'm okay with that though, because going back to the,
but it's a bug in your app.
No, I wouldn't necessarily call it a bug.
No, in this case, let's say it was though. In this case, let's say that you're over on one screen, you see one thing, you come to another screen where you're using the same data, but theirs was cached and yours isn't. It is a bug now.
Okay, but where I'm going with this though is from the point of view of like going back to Uncle Bob's, accidental versus true duplication, right? Like just because one feature team writes something and the second feature team duplicates that same code, it doesn't mean it's actually true duplication.
Yeah,
it might
fine with
change
that.
for different reasons.
Fine with that, but I'm sticking with the caching thing where
Yeah, you're stuck on cache.
Well, this is the problem.
I would flush that cache.
This was the whole thing that was kind of driving me nuts, is that, because people aren't aware of how it was done, because it was done in a very localized spot. It wasn't
But I
done.
think in your example, though, you would, once that bug is found, then it kind of highlights the problem. And now it's known like, oh, hey, team A, why aren't you doing this? And team B is like, oh, because we're doing it like, that's when the two teams talk, figure like, oh, yeah, we found this.
But do you figure out a solution, or does team B just say, oh, okay, well, we need to cache it like this over here or something? That's what I'm getting at, is a lot of times you'll see things done in a very localized piece of code, as opposed to saying, wait a second, this needs to be brought up a level because this should be handled by something else. This shouldn't be done down here in the weeds. This should be handled by something that knows about cache or knows about data access or something like that.
I mean, kind of the takeaway I'm getting from this, though, is like maybe where you're saying the teams should be drawn is like, or like, where the lines are drawn for like who's responsible, where the responsibilities lie is like, maybe the team is responsible for like have the smaller team that's responsible for this overreaching feature, right? So like if cache is something that's needed across all, it's a cross-cutting concern across all of the parts of the application. And there's the one group that's like, hey, we maintain that, and that's our thing. We're Cash Money, and we're the Cash Money brothers, and that's what we do.
Now, would you say that caching is easier if you've got like a strong, consistent API, like a firm REST API?
I don't know that the API matters.
Well, maybe if it goes back to like when I mentioned the repository pattern in front of it,
the pattern.
That's what I was thinking.
In that case,
Yes.
that is the API.
The pattern backing it, I think, is.
And so that could be like another cross-cutting concern team, right? Is the data access layer team, like how data is read or written to whatever your storage mechanism is, and that team could say like, oh, hey, we're going to cache these things.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But you're still not on board with like the smaller teams more siloed and focused on particular areas.
No, I actually like it. I do like that because that's actually my biggest complaint. Like what you said, is typically when people are just moving all over the place, there are no patterns established. Because it's literally, okay, I'm in here. You're almost like a task force at that point, right? You're on a special ops mission. Your mission was go in and get somebody to get out. That's what you did. You're gone. You're never looking back. You're done, right? Whereas if you are camped out somewhere for a little while, you're gonna tidy up, and I think that's important. And I really like that. I think trying to hit the balance for people that want to do that kind of stuff versus people that like to just be the ones that go and do other things. But I don't know, man. I like the small teams. In a nutshell, I like the small teams focusing on small parts of a product. I think that it overall will make the product better.
I think Uncle Bob said, organize your code into layers, horizontal layers, and then you can kind of adjust your team as needed, however you like. And it's pretty good arguments for that, if you remember. I don't remember exactly what they were anymore.
I don't either. But yeah, I'm going to have to go back and read that.
It seems
like if you want to be around feature, if you want to be vertical, that's fine. Just keep the code in horizontal slices.
Keep it the same. Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems like I remember hearing something too about like the teams would start to match however the code was done. Does that sound familiar?
Oh yeah, it's like the code would grow to kind of mirror the organization of the company and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to change topics on you guys. Do you you remember Napster? Everybody
yes.
Napster, right?
Those are the best of times.
Everybody
the internet.
Metallica versus Napster, right?
Oh man, AIM, Napster, and StarCraft. Like, take me home, please. Take me back.
Yes.
So I wrote this like, in the theme of, that era of Napster versus Metallica or Metallica versus Napster. So Napster good, COBOL bad.
Yeah.
So there was this interesting article, and I don't remember where I found this, but I'll have a link to it. But what was your first programming language that you started writing in? Let's start with Alan first, since Joe did the survey first.
It was on a handheld TRS-80 basic.
Basic was your first language.
Basic.
Okay. Joe?
Logo.
Okay.
Never heard of.
If you want to count, it was a little turtle. Remember that?
It was what?
Little turtle.
It was on an Atari, an old Atari, right?
I don't know about Atari, but I had one of my classes had it was like a logo, so like a little triangle, and you would say like write 10, and it would move 10 and draw, and you could say pin up or pin down, and eventually you get into like looping and I think even recursion, so you could draw some pretty cool patterns. So I loved just playing with that and trying to like draw cool stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, and then they came out with Lego Logo a few years after that, where you basically plug this like really obnoxiously big cable into like a little Lego motor, and you would still, the turtle things would be like turn left, and the motor would kind of like try to turn it left, and you'd use the same basic logo commands.
Very cool.
Sounds like Scratch.
Oh, yeah. Since Scratch.
Okay, so for me, it was Pascal. Like that was my first. So it turns out like it matters what your first programming language is, at least according to this article and some of the research in this article. So basically the idea here, though, is that the language that you start with, right, the paradigms, the idioms, whatever, of that first language, they're going to dictate about how you think about everything else. All the data structures you're going to think about, all the algorithms you're going to think about. I mean, honestly, Alan, listen to what Joe just said. Now we understand why he's always writing games, right?
That's why.
His first experience was with the game,
That's
right?
true.
So it makes sense, right? And so basically, we've made this quote before where it's like, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so if the language that is well is Perl, then everything that's going to come to you, you're going to be like, oh, well, I'll just write that in Perl. You want an e-commerce site? I'll write that in Perl. Right? You heard his reaction. Yeah, exactly. And so like, I joked with like, Napster good, COBOL bad. Because, in this article, they were talking about like how Dijkstra was anti-COBOL, right? That there's a quote in here that said, he says, the tools we use have a profound and devious influence on our thinking habits and therefore our thinking abilities. The use of COBOL cripples the mind. Its teaching should therefore be regarded as a criminal offense.
I get what you're saying. It's kind of like you can imagine like an art school trying to like teach students with like crayons or some other tool that's just not very good, and like how are they going to get to those like the place where they need to be if the tools that they kind of grow up with are not suited?
Now here's where it's about to get hilarious. This is where it's going to take a hilarious turn. You ready? Dijkstra goes on to say, it is practically impossible to teach good programming to students that have had any prior exposure to BASIC.
Ouch.
As potential programmers, they are mentally mutilated beyond hope of regeneration.
That hurts.
So it's so funny that you said BASIC.
Yeah. Oh, man. That was brutal.
That hurts.
But yeah, so, I mean, you can understand it, though. It kind of, like, let's flip this around, right? So if you started off in a strongly, and we've even mentioned this before, like, I joked around, like, earlier in this episode about JavaScript and, my thoughts on it, back in Coding Blocks Year 1, right? And even during Coding Blocks Year 1, when we would talk about things like JavaScript versus something like a C, I think I had mentioned then, it was like, well, because I grew up in this like strongly typed, language type of environment, that's my preference. I like that. Versus if you grew up in a loosey kind of Python or JavaScript kind of world, you're like, yeah, this is cool, man. Like, JavaScript, like, like take C++, for example, right? Like, and you try to, reference a property on that object, and the compiler is like, nope, this is wrong, stop right now. And where Python's like, okay, yeah, no, this is probably okay. And then at runtime, Python's like, whoa, wait, no, this is wrong. And, JavaScript's like, you write the code and it's like, that property might be there. And then at runtime, it's like, it wasn't, but it's okay. We'll move on, right? Like, JavaScript could care less, right? So if you come from that kind of C world, for example, and then you look at something like Perl, you're like, what is all of this? What is this stuff, right? Like dollar underbar, what are you doing? Like, why? How did that magically appear? What?
Yeah.
How did that suddenly get a value? Right? Like, what is that doing? Weird things like that. That's what I'm saying.
I
I mentioned like Perl programmer looking at something with Java for the first time and be like, public static void what?
Right.
What throws? Why do I got to throw all these things?
Right.
But it kind of goes in line with what I saw in a couple books. Like one thing is that like what you do matters. Like your habits matter. So if you build up habits, with those crayons or with those languages that don't have the kind of precision or whatever, that aren't as professional, we'll say, or aren't as strict as some static languages, then those patterns that you build come out when you're working on other things and focusing on bigger problems. Like those things slip out. And so that can be bad. But the good news is that, you're a human with a brain that's like super good at adapting to new situations. And so you can kind of retrain those parts of you and just work on the things that you want to improve. And you're really good at that. Like we're designed for that. So there's hope.
True.
So do you think that being a polyglot fixes this?
That's a good question. I remember when I first learned Ruby after working in like Java and Cold Fusion for a long time and a little bit of JavaScript and like seeing how they did things and how they solved problems. And a lot of the tools were available in languages I was used to, but seeing it being so common, just the different kind of patterns, like it really kind of changed how I thought about programming. I feel like it was a really good influence on me. So I think that being a polyglot is a good thing.
I think it does fix it. Just for what he said, you see the other patterns, right? Things start to make sense. Like, oh, this is a better way to do it. The whole functional thing being overblown. I think there's value in learning functional programming to pick up the patterns, right? And to see that kind of stuff. And so I think the polyglot side of this does help you become better at all of them, right? Like you don't approach everything as, hey, here's my hammer. I think it helps you to think differently.
I think the downside is like if you're always looking at new languages, you never go too deep in one, then potentially your code could be really inconsistent and kind of influenced by whatever you're reading at the time.
Yeah, true too.
I'm willing to take that.
What about you on the polyglot?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of curious because ultimately the whole article, or this, at least this portion of the article, was about like, whatever your first one is, man, that's what's going to lay the foundation for everything else, right? And so, in which case, it's kind of a loaded question. Can being a polyglot fix this? No, it can't possibly fix that because you can't learn multiple languages at one time. So if you're truly influenced by the first one you learned, then that influence is there. Like, there's it's that old expression about you only get one chance to make a first impression.
Yeah.
Right. So then it can't possibly fix that. I like what you're saying about, the other patterns and whatnot. But at the same time, I'm thinking like, well, it kind of depends. What's that next language? Because if that next language is too similar to the other one, then you didn't really change anything. If you went from a C++ to a C# to a Java, like, I mean, those are all like really close in the same wheelhouse. Like the same kind of concepts and things apply there. There's not a whole lot of difference there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I'd say all three of us are probably pretty true polyglots in this regard because, I mean, even just thinking about over the years. So I started with BASIC when I was a kid. And then my next, I guess, real one was probably C++. And then after that, I think I was in Cold Fusion. And then I went to C# and done some Java. So like literally you're talking pretty opposite ends of the spectrum on all those things. And then you got things like SQL that's not a programming language, but it's a querying language. So I mean, when you think about that, that is a lot of brain massaging there to get those, because they're all very different, right? Like super different. So I don't know, man. Like, I do think being a polyglot fixes it. And no, if you're only spending, a day in each one of them, no, that's not going to work. But if you spend any significant amount of time in them, you start to see the things that work and don't across those different, programming paradigms.
So learn one new language a year.
Some people do that, right? Like that was one of your goals at one point, was to pick up a new language each year, which I think is crazy. But
Yeah, I didn't keep up with it very well.
But it is cool. Like, I mean, even I played with Ruby for a little while, and it was pretty neat, right? Like, it felt a little bit JavaScripty, but on the same time, like they'd done some really nice stuff. Like with some of their syntax was just awesome.
Yep.
So, you know, I don't know. I don't think you're screwed with the first one that you picked. I don't think so.
I mean, Ruby kind of seems like Python, Ruby. They kind of seem kind of similar.
I've never done any Python.
Maybe like Go kind of seems similar to like a C, but like, you know, if you really wanted to get to something like mind melting, then like, you know, go from, C# to Haskell,
Right.
for example. Like those are totally opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And so maybe like if that's where, if your first language was Haskell,
You're done.
right? Well, no, I'm not saying you're done, but what
No.
I'm saying is like, it's totally going to, you know, that's your first impression
Right.
of how all code should be from then on.
Yep.
Right. And so, yeah, that's what you're going to expect.
Readability. I remember going from playing with Visual Basic and going into C# maybe? I don't remember. But thinking, why would anybody do things so differently, right? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Dim variable as? What is that? Why not just var? Why not just string? Or, I mean, yeah, it is funny, but yeah, you get into the functional things.
Because I like dim variables.
That's right. Oh man. So yeah, I think we've been fixed of it. Whatever we started with, I think we've all landed in a halfway decent spot. So I don't think it was the worst thing ever.
I like it. All right, so I guess I'm up again, and I've got another weirdo one because I can't just be normal, right? I got to always like find the rules and then figure out how to make them weird. So I'm interested in your short-term, mid-term, and long-term bets on programming technology. Like, what do you think? Like, if you had like programming dollars to invest in the programming in like stock market, and you could put like your money into I don't know, mobile apps or cloud or JavaScript or React or whatever, you know. So be creative with it. But you get to invest into three. One for short term, so one that you think is going to give you the most return in 1 year, a midterm, the one that's going to give you the most return in 5 years, and one long term, which is going to be, we'll say, 20 years.
So I have to invest some kind of money in a technology.
Yeah, and don't worry about the amount. It's just if you kind of had, like, imagine you're in Vegas and you're betting on what's going to be more popular 1 year from now.
All right. I'll kick us off. Short term, I'm going to go JavaScript.
Okay, and you're going to go on broad JavaScript.
Yeah, just in general. Like it's the language that everything's adopting, tooling's being built around, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
Midterm? Should we? I'll do my three. Midterm, we'll go cloud, because cloud, regardless, AWS, Azure, Google, whatever, pick your cloud of choice.
Yep.
That's just getting bigger and bigger. Long term, I'm going to go AI.
Okay.
Because you look at things like what I think MIT, didn't they just do another one of those dog things? Like apparently that thing's gotten even smarter. So yeah, I think long term we want people to think. We want robots and machines to think for us. We don't want to have to think. So I think that's what's going to happen. We're all going to be super fat, sitting down eating chips while our surrogates are out doing things for us.
Wally. Yep.
Yeah, there we go. So those are my investments.
I like it.
I mean, I definitely think that Python would be in there, just because like other articles that I've seen, it's like one of the more in demand languages out there. So I think I'm going to bet against you on.
Is that your short term though? Is that your short term or your midterm or your long term?
Yeah, I don't know, because I like the other answers you gave. But I was like, yeah, I don't want to copy them, but I was kind of like, well, I don't know. Cloud would probably be like long term, because that's going to be here forever. I think that's a long term play. Uh, so, but I don't know what my other two technologies would be though that I would bet on.
You could just say Python, Python, Python.
Well, no. I mean, originally I was thinking like, well, blockchain should probably be somewhere in that though. That would probably be like, maybe it'd be like Python short term, blockchain middle, and cloud long term.
Or would you say, okay, not blockchain, would you say digital currencies? Is that going to be the big thing, right? Like there's a bunch of different things we could go with.
No, not digital currencies. I wasn't thinking of digital currencies when I was
Just
thinking blockchain. Yeah.
You could have said wearables.
And I also think that Tesla has to be mentioned somewhere in that too.
Oh, did you say wearables?
Like wearables, like actualized self or quantified self or
Yeah, no.
Internet of Things.
We're over that. I think we're over that. I think like the whole phone thing we're done with. Like I don't think that's anything exciting about. I think phone wise, technology wise, like because phones are kind of like close to wearables because we keep them attached to our head all the time. I think the next thing we're really waiting for there is like the reinvention of the flip phone. Like we're waiting for the flip phone to come back as a smartphone. I think that's the next big thing that we're waiting for there that hasn't happened, but yet there's always like rumors about like, oh, here's the next Apple iPhone.
Yep.
Oh,
No cyborg implants. Nobody's going for that bet.
The only thing that might make me change my mind on the long term would be something in the medical field regarding technology, like
are we going like all out?
I don't
20
know.
years. What's 20 years?
Yeah, like I don't know about treatments or maybe just genetics, right? Like it's probably not far from it to where they're gonna be like, oh, well, we see these markers and that means that you're more prone to cancer or whatever, and so either we're going to treat you different or you're going to be on certain diets or what. I don't know. Like that's the other thing, the other side of things where I think that further down the line, if I was going to put my money on something and it wasn't AI, it would probably be somewhere in the medical field.
What was the year thing again? Like what was the definitions for short?
1, 5, and 10. Or sorry, 1, 5, and 20.
1, 5, and 20?
Yep.
Like within 20 years?
20 plus years.
Cars are going to be here.
Yeah,
that's definitely happening.
That's supposed to be by 2022. So
that could totally upset the economy. That would be
that would be game changer.
Big deal.
Like imagine if you lived in New York City, right? All the yellow cabs, if they just suddenly became self-driving cars, right?
Mm-hmm. That's the whole industry gone.
Well, workforce,
right?
Yeah,
workforce,
yeah. Still
trucking,
but long haul trucking, yeah, that's.
But you know what's funny though? I've read articles on this before. They always talk about when they automate things that people worry about. Oh, I'm going to lose my job, but it creates more jobs in other areas, right? There's going to have to be people that maintain these things. So I mean, there's other things that happen. So, but
it's been like that throughout history, though.
Right? Exactly. So the self-driving car is an interesting one too, dude. I would kill for like Jetson type cars, right? Like give me Skyways. That would be amazing.
Yep.
That's not.
Yeah, I know some people working on self-driving cars in the Slack. So I mean, it's like it's happening. This is real. So is that your bet for 20 years? Self-driving cars?
I mean, it's probably the best thing I've said so far. Yeah, I guess.
Okay. All right. So what's your 3, Joe?
In 1 year, my bet is on JavaScript. It was tempting to pick either React or Vue. I couldn't. So I'm just going with JavaScript. I think that'll give me the most ROI in 1 year. For midterm, I'm going to say JavaScript. So 5 years from now, I think we're still going to be talking about JavaScript. Probably won't be Node anymore. But I think JavaScript is sticking around. And for 20 years, this is really tough because I was really tempted to say like machine learning or AI. Like that was really tough. But I think I finally settled on cloud. I think that computers are going to keep getting smaller and more distributed and more granular and kind of spread throughout our lives. And so I think the cloud is going to be like really important. And I think that's going to be a bigger, economic, ecologic, and social kind of factor in our lives. So that's where my programming dollars are going.
Do you guys see, like, I just, I read books like the guy that you turned me on to, Demon
Daniel Suarez.
Like, do you think that, let's say 15, 20 years from now, is it going to be something where everybody's wearing some sort of either sunglasses or some sort of implant contact type thing in their eye that they see somebody and they see their name? Or is that where we're going? Like, I don't see it as being completely out of the question.
Google Glass, right? I mean, that was the interesting thing about that book. If you were lucky enough to read The Demon before, like when it originally came out, it like predated technologies that later came out. And so that idea about like wearing glasses where you could like see data and information about stuff that you're looking at. And then, years later, Google Glass comes out and you're like, whoa, it's just like in the book.
Yeah.
And then Google Glass died.
Man, I can totally see something like that. And the cloud would be a big part of that, right? Like the cloud would be the central nervous system of that. So I think the cloud's going to enable all these things that self-driving cars, that's going to be another one that the cloud is probably going to be heavily involved in, right?
So will AI.
AI will be. Yeah. So
did you guys, speaking of cloud, see the story about like it was Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Twitter, and the data projects that they're working on to where you can take data out of one system and take it from one to another?
No.
So it's like an interchange of data. So it's kind of like keeping along with your cloud idea, right? Like as things become more ubiquitous and part of our daily lives, right, that language between them becomes more common too, so that it becomes like, just another socket in the wall that you can just plug in whatever you want to plug into.
I mean, it's going to be interesting, right? Like, I'm trying to think. There's certain things that are almost just available now, right? Like if you go to Starbucks, you can get on the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that the cloud's going to be baked into many things that are purchased in the future. You go to buy a car, part of that cost is going to be the cloud subscription that came with it, type of thing. Or, and maybe you don't even buy cars in the future. Maybe it's going to be something where, all the cars are the same.
Oh, no. Have you heard of this? I thought this is where you were going.
Like car share type
Have you?
thing?
No, Volvo is doing this now. There's a subscription service that Volvo is coming out with for one of their cars.
Yeah, see, that's where I think things are going to change, right?
I forget. I want to say it was like depending on which model car you got, I think there was like two different options that you could get, and like the highest priced option was $600 a month, and that included everything.
That's not bad.
You don't change the oil in this thing. You do no maintenance at all on it. It's a subscription, and when you're done with the car, it's not like a lease where it's like, oh well, it's whatever. It's like you just turn it in, you're done.
I mean,
I forgot this part too. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. This is exciting. It also included the insurance.
Oh, that's killer. I mean, but that's kind of what I'm thinking is if you look at the way that we've been going. So actually, you know what, if I could invest in something differently, it might just be subscriptions, because look at everything that's happening now, right? Like if you start a software business, what are you going to do? You're going to do software as a service because you want that monthly income coming in, right? If
it makes your bookkeeping easier.
Yeah, totally. And if I don't know, man, it just seems like everything's going in that direction anyway. So cars, I don't know, maybe even learning institutions, right? Like instead of paying to go to college, you're going to pay a subscription to hey, I'm going to pay my $100 a year from the time I'm,
Pluralsight.
Yeah.
Coursera courses are like that. Like
same thing.
Yeah, they're kind of already we're kind of already getting to these subscription models for these things that you're mentioning.
So
I got a 30-day free trial to the University of Florida.
There you go. But I mean, seriously, think about it though. If education's been getting out of control, right? As far as costs and all that, there's articles coming out all the time. Like there's some dude that had $1 million. I think I sent you guys the article.
Yeah, he's a doctor.
Yeah, a dentist. He had $1 million in student loan debt. First off, how do banks let that happen? But secondly, paying the minimum payments in 10 years, it was going to double to $2 million. And it's like, okay, I mean, come on.
Yeah, if I remember that article right, he was counting on the fact that after like 25 years, the debt was going to be forgiven or something because it was going to be so high or something. I think if I remember that article
something
right.
ridiculous, but yeah. So I mean, I don't know. This whole subscription thing, I think with information becoming more and more available, going back to your cloud thing, that's not a bad place to invest. I think everything's going to be tied into it. And whatever you're paying subscriptions for is also going to be paying into that, right? The Microsofts, the
Oh yeah.
Amazons, the Googles, they're all going to be getting a cut of all purchases that are happening because they're all going to be sending data up there.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hurts to like say, like a Jeopardy is an example. Like I used to just buy it every couple of years, and so it kind of hurts to have a subscription fee. But really, it's better on both ends, I think, because on their side, it kind of lowers their risk. Like they've got recurring income; they don't have a big burst when a product comes out, and then a desert of income until another one. And as a consumer, I can pay $9 a month or whatever it is per month. And if I need that money back, or if I, lose my job or something else happens, I can change that. And so I don't have to pay a big bunch of money up front. It just kind of evens things out.
Yeah, you guys remember when Adobe Suite for Photoshop and all that was like $2,500 a year?
Yeah.
And now you can get that plus way more for $50 a month, right?
It used to just download on Napster.
Nobody ever did that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember like just buying Photoshop alone was $900 by itself.
Right. Now you spend $600 a year. And like you said, they're not getting a huge influx of cash, but they've got this steady stream of income that people even forget they're paying for, like me.
Yep.
And,
18 versions of Adobe Photoshop later.
That's right.
Yeah, I swear that Adobe wanted people to steal Photoshop back in the day. Not anymore. Like CS3 days, they were like, you know what? Let's go ahead and let the students, like the 20-year-olds, like get the free copy and like learn how to use it and like edit their little crappy websites. And then when those guys at 30, they're all going to pay $900.
That's right.
You say that like them wanting to steal it. Adobe was one of the first that I can recall where part of the license agreement actually spelled out that you can install this software on multiple machines as long as you use them at different times and the percentage of use was varied. Right, like you couldn't use both machines 100% of the time, right?
Right,
that would be possible, but
right.
Yep.
So, yeah, that
all right,
that was fun, man. I liked it.
Yeah, and let us know in the comments if you think otherwise or what your thoughts on any of these topics have been. Really.
Yeah. So
with that,
yeah,
we'll head into Alan's favorite portion of the show. It's the tip of the week.
Yeah, baby.
All right, so. I've got several tips here for you, which is going to be kind of sad since I think Joe was hammering on the machine learning earlier. So the first one is going to be, I found this really cool article from Google. The rules of, basically it was Google's machine learning overview, really. But one of the sections in it was their machine learning guides. And one of the sections in it was the rules of machine learning, with a subtitle of Best Practices for Machine Learning Engineering. And they had like all of these different steps for it that I thought was kind of interesting. Like one of them was like, hey, before machine learning, hey, don't be afraid to launch your product without machine learning. Like that's not, you don't have to, right? And that it's good to just go ahead and get the design out there and implement metrics. And that way you can get data and you kind of get buy-in from your users early on about like any data that you might want to collect or whatnot. Right. And, when it comes time to like choose machine learning over some complex heuristic, right. That's when you need to start bringing it in because that complex heuristic is going to be unmaintainable. And there's a bunch of interesting points in here. So I'll have a link to that. But then there was also this other cool one that I found that I think this was trending on like the programming subreddit, but it was Rico's cheat sheets. And it has like this whole list of okay, let's say, for example, Docker Compose, right? You want to know the cheat sheets on that. So it has like basic examples and commands that you're going to want to know just to get kind of started, right? Building with Docker Compose, running it, how to set ports, environment variables, and dependencies, things like that, right? There's some in here for Dockerfile. There's Git is in here. Then there's like IDEs. So maybe you want to know about Atom or Sublime, and it'll show you like, hey, here's all the keystrokes that might be of interest to you, right? So you can find this at devhints.io. There's just so many in here. I can't even begin. from Bash to React to VS Code. Cron is in there. Chef is in there. Just you name it, it's in here. There's a cheat sheet for it to get you started. So pretty cool little tip on that. And then one last little tip. I shared this with Alan like a couple weeks back. And I was like, I don't know if everybody realizes this. Maybe a lot of people don't know this. But if you have a Thunderbolt display, then on your Thunderbolt display, on the inside of it that you can't see, so let's say you have your display just sitting in normal landscape mode, then on the left and right border of your display, one near the top corners and one near each of the bottom corners are magnets. And it's super awesome because you can use it to hold your stuff, right? So, it can't be like too heavy. It needs to be somewhat lightweight. But if you are, quote, Apple fanboy, no judging, then you probably, like me, you might have a dongle or two that Samsung is laughing at you about, and you need a place to keep your dongle. So you can just stick it right there on that magnet, right there on the display, and it's handy. It's right there where you want it, when you need it.
Love it. Actually, I saw his monitor. I was like, but do you have like a tape behind that? He's like, no, there's a magnet in there.
Yeah, so basically I have like the what is it? What's that? The standard headphone, it's 1.8 millimeter jack. No, 3.5 millimeter jack. To the lightning connector, right? That short little dongle, and it's just stuck to the side of the display. And you would think like, hey, how is that staying there? How is it not falling? And it's no trick. There's just a magnet there, and it's holding on to the lightning connection.
It's pretty cool. All right. So on mine, I actually just thought of one that I meant to have in here. And I struggled this episode. It is one of my favorite parts of the episode. And I literally was just dying to try and figure out a tip. So the first one that I did, because it was the lazy man's way out, is it's not as cool as Outlaws was. He's got devhints.io, which had millions of cheat sheets. I have one cheat sheet, and it is the ECMA ES 2015 or ES 6 cheat sheet. It's on GitHub. There's some good tips in there. It's just a nice quick overview of some of the features in ES 2015. I don't think we've talked about those in quite a while, if we ever went over them in depth at all. But so, enjoy that. The other one is, so I've been trying to Outlaw brought up the thing earlier about should you have smaller teams working on one portion of a site or on an app or whatever. And I've been trying to like diagram out an application. And the problem is when you do that, you run into a lot of things. Like there's these verticals, there's these horizontals, and just trying to even get it out on a piece of paper can be really mind bending, right? It's almost as hard as programming. And
yeah, you need more than one piece of paper.
Dude, it's ridiculous, right? Well, I found this tool because I was on my phone and I was like, man, there's got to be a decent diagramming solution. And there's one called Draw Express. And on Android, it has excellent reviews. On iOS, it looks like it's about a 4-star. But it's really cool stuff. Like you can open up this thing and you can either do flowcharts, you can do mind maps, you can do almost like UML type stuff like class diagrams for software. And what's really cool is you can draw a shape on the screen and it'll plop it out there. So your standard boxes, your circles, your diamonds, that kind of stuff, it'll do it. But what I thought was even neater is the way that they've done some of the gestures with the thing. So let's say that I draw 4 boxes on the screen and those represent 4 portions of my app. I can now draw a box around those and it'll group them together and create like a little dotted grouping thing for it. And then I can move all those together. You can double tap to fill in the things and all. So at any rate, really nice little drawing tool for doing diagrams and flowcharts and whatnot in a fairly easy to use way. And they use gestures so that you can just, if you want to delete something off screen, tap on it and draw an X and it'll disappear. So thought it was really fun. I think it was $8 on Android. And I don't know what it is on iOS. Maybe it's about the same. So
This thing looks like Glyphy, but for iOS.
or
man. For mobile, I should say.
Yeah, dude, I love it. It's a lot of fun, and I think that so there's a free version, and I think it limits you to a few diagrams. Or if you do the paid version, then you get, you can do as many as you want. So again, it's mind mapping plus flowcharts plus other types of diagrams all in one. I really liked it so far.
All right, and guess I'm up next. So I found a really interesting Android app. It's another mobile app here. It's not on iOS, unfortunately. It's called Algorithms, and the subtitle there is explained and animated. And so it's like, I think $2. You can pay like another $4 to unlock all the algorithms. But it's basically just a collection of algorithms, like what things that we've talked about: Dexter's algorithm, Bellman forward, merge sort. And you can click on it and step through like line by line and actually see it do a nice little animation with the little objects and the numbers and everything's nice looking. You also hit just kind of play and it'll play through and do the whole animation at a nice reasonable speed. But it's also just got some really nice background info. So I could say, scroll down to the security section and say encryption basics, and it's not really animated. It's almost like a little slideshow and kind of step through, and it's explaining, public-private key security to me. So it's just kind of nice, and it's a real lightweight app. So it's just, you can kind of like keep under the desk in an interview. So when they ask you about, differences between stacks and keys, you can just kind of look under the desk and give them an intelligent answer.
Dude, that's really sweet. This thing has got a ton of reviews too.
Yeah, it's really nice. And it looks like they're adding more stuff all the time. That makes me want to make it.
Yeah, I'm downloading it right now.
Yeah, I really liked programming those algorithms that we did last time. So I would like to get spare time and program a lot of algorithms.
Most excellent.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and more using your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. And also, along those lines, if you haven't already left us a review, we'd greatly appreciate it if you would by heading to www.codingblocks.net/review, where you can find some helpful links there.
Yep. While you're up there, check out our extensive show notes, examples, discussions, and more.
And send your feedback, questions, and rants to the Slack channel, or join my guild in Warcraft because the next expansion is coming out, and that's where I'm going to be for the next couple months. And follow us on Twitter at Coding Blocks, or head over to codingblocks.net where you can find all our social links at the top of the page, and also the Warcraft Guild.
Hey, and we keep forgetting, if you want some swag, some stickers, something, head to codingblocks.net/swag, and we'll get those sent out to you.
Oatmeal.